Thank you very much for that, Men in Suits. And welcome one and all to this terrific highlight of the week of Storming Against Violence events, brought to you by the Victorians Women's Trust and, of course, the Melbourne Storm Rugby League Club. My name is Andrew O'Keefe. I'm the chairman of the White Ribbon Foundation, and it's a wonderful honour to be your host for this evening. Now, first of all, yes, thank you very much to the Men in Suits Choir, sounding great, under the direction of Stephen Taberner there, for such a bright opening to proceedings. And I love the touch. We've lost the knife, we have gained a beard. Very important. But nonetheless, I mean, you listen to the song Delilah, and there's still so much in it that bristles. I mean, the very chorus, my Delilah, speaks of ownership, doesn't it? She was my woman. And it's amazing how we can all sing along word for word with the song and hardly ever stop to reflect upon that. You know, it's just one of the many, many thousands of deeply culturally embedded messages that we get every single day that talk about, men's power and authority over women. And certainly I think we're here tonight to discuss whether the phrase, she was my woman, has any kind of place in a civilised society. That's one of the issues that we'll be talking about tonight with the tremendous minds that we have brought together for you. It's a great lineup of speakers, all looking at the problem of violence against women, but more specifically, the challenges and opportunities for us in addressing that problem. So from the outset, let's set the parameters. Let's be very clear about this. The evidence is overwhelming that violence against women is a huge problem in Australia. You know, 1 in 3 women experiences violence in her life. It outstrips obesity, smoking, and drink driving as the leading contributor to death, disability, and illness for women in the prime of their life. And its effects are obviously devastating for the individual women involved, but also for their children, for their whole families, for the notion of family, and indeed for communities generally, as we see, right around Australia. Now, by virtue of being raised a man, I think, in Australia, most of us blokes in this room will at some point have contributed to the problem in some ways over the years. And I just reflect upon my own experience. You know, I can think of countless times in my life when I have laughed at sexist or chauvinistic jokes, you know, even when I didn't find them funny, even when I felt uncomfortable, and I laughed because I felt too small to speak up in the group. I can think of times when I've seen friends or colleagues disparage their partners openly and I've been too embarrassed to say anything. I have known people living in situations of abuse and had no idea what to do, and so consequently, did very little. And I admit that, in my own life, I have behaved from time to time in ways that fell somewhere on the spectrum between insensitive and scurrilous with the women in my life. I've been hurtful to some women that I love in my life, and I've excused that behaviour on the basis, well, that, that's what men are like, and, it doesn't really mean anything anyway. But being involved in the White Ribbon campaign over the last 7 or 8 years has helped me see that it always does mean something. That every time I do that, I'm supporting the belief that men have rights and privileges greater than those of women, or that somehow men have a special place in this world that isn't shared by women. And whilst I might not physically abuse my partner, it's those beliefs that are the basis of the notion that it is okay to beat your wife, or that it is okay to run your partner down, or that it is okay simply to treat women as sexual toys. So, by accepting those norms rather than challenging them, I have contributed to the problem. But as I say, 6, 7 years ago, I got involved with White Ribbon because I decided that I would prefer to contribute to the solution. So then the question is, what is the solution? And what can we do about violence against women? And tonight's event attempts in some way to answer that question, or at least to start this conversation that will answer the question. At White Ribbon, our approach is to target Australian men and boys, to encourage them to understand that this is their problem and to challenge them to take responsibility for fixing it. We believe that in order to reduce violence against women, we must create a culture in which all Australian men inherently understand that violence is wrong in every circumstance, and that the premise of all their relationships must be the assumption that everyone deserves respect, be it men or women, all relationships. I can't tell you the countless ways in which White Ribbon is attempting to create that culture, because that would take hours, and I know that we are very keen to hear from our guest speakers. I'll just give you one little example. We know, for example, that it's utterly essential that we target kids at school age with messages of respect and practical tools for gender responsibility before their attitudes around gender are set in stone. The 2008 White Ribbon report prepared by Michael Flood, who is going to be speaking tonight, called Assault on Our Future, shows that 500,000 kids in this country are growing up with violence in their household. So for them, violence is a normal and legitimate way of resolving disputes. Now, these kids are our sons. Oh, and indeed our daughters. And they need to know that there is a better way of negotiating relationships with the opposite sex. So one of the programs that White Ribbon runs, for example, is called Breaking the Silence. It offers facilitated workshops aimed at school leaders with the intention of embedding that culture of respect through the teaching staff and indeed through the ideas of the students themselves. Now, that's been piloted in 60 schools in New South Wales. It's been academically evaluated. We're now looking to roll it out in Victoria through a partnership with Paul Zappa from Be the Hero, who is again one of our speakers tonight. But that's just one of the ways that White Ribbon seeks to tackle this problem. And of course, White Ribbon is just one of the many organisations and individuals doing so. We're very lucky tonight to meet some others who are working in the area with some really interesting thoughts on this problem. And I'd really like to thank the Victorian Women's Trust for designing this event tonight as part of its week against storming against violence. So thank you very much to the Victorian Women's Trust. It's a magnificent event. And thank you all so much for being here. It's wonderful to see so much interest in it. Now, just before we go to our speakers, I just want to take a moment of your time to put some faces to this issue. And we'll start with some that you'll all recognise and hopefully you'll all respect. I'll hand over to you right now, over to him.
I was a child during a time when domestic violence against women was a shameful secret. Everyone knew about it. Everyone within the community knew where it was happening, but nobody was doing anything about it. And within the immediate family circle, it was so shameful and embarrassing an aspect of your home life that no one wanted it exposed or discussed. The end result was that it continued, and there was no attempt either from the authorities or within the community itself to diminish it. I experienced firsthand violence against my mother from an angry and unhappy man who was not able to control his emotions nor his hands. And the harm done by those events, of course, the physical harm, the physical scars that were left, the blood that was shed, the wounds that were exposed were a shocking pain. But there are other aspects of violence which have more lasting impact psychologically on family members. It is destructful and tainting. As a child witnessing these events, one cannot help somehow feeling responsible for them, for the pain and the screaming and the misery. And it is deeply confusing, and those confusions are not things which are easily disposed of in adult life. They stay with you, and you are given, a child is given a very bad lesson in male responsibility, self-control. And I know it in my own life. In the past, I have had issues in relationships and with women in my life which have a history in the experiences that I had as a child in my own home. So far as the authorities are concerned, there have been great advances, and there needed to be, because as a child I heard police officers in my home say, well, she must have provoked him. And I heard doctors who came to treat my mother say, well, Mrs. Stewart, it takes two to make a fight. They had no idea. Today we're much more sensitive to these issues, but not sensitive enough. Still these things are hushed up. Still people don't talk about them. Still the violence is allowed to continue. So I would like to see these issues taken as seriously by the government as quite properly they take issues of drunk driving, violence against minors, and their smoking campaigns.
I met my future husband at 17. We dated on and off for years before we finally married when I was 27. I always knew that there was something different about this man, and maybe that was part of the attraction. But I chose to ignore the warning signs in pursuit of the dream, to create a happy family. My ex-husband wasn't the obvious abuser, the type that most people understand. Professionally, he was used to being in control, a position of power. He was the type that manipulated and controlled and verbally abused. If I'm honest with myself, the abuse was probably always there. This came to a point after the girls were born, that I made a decision that I didn't want them growing up in an abusive household, and learning that it was okay to be treated that way by a father or a husband. I was looking for love and thought I found it, but it was a very controlling and destructive love. The relationship stopped me being the person I wanted to be. His controlling demands for my attention, his constant need to know where I was and who I was with, and nobody ever passed his standards. I was continually being told how to do things, what to wear, who to talk to, that I was not smart as him, and my attention had to be on him. I did not believe the abuse, but I did not challenge his opinions, as I only wanted things to be happy, and I didn't like to argue or stand up for myself. After the birth of our two daughters, the abuse escalated, as he was no longer the centre of my attention, and also he had developed an addiction to pornography. The abuse continued for a number of years, with me taking more of the responsibility around the house and raising the kids, but also returning to work. I was able to secure casual work at a place where I actually felt valued and respected, something I hadn't felt for a long time. I left with nothing, as it was not a planned move, but I knew in my heart that it was the right one. However, the abuse did not stop. I managed to return to the family home twice to collect the basics for me and the girls before the locks were changed. He then made the decision to deliver our possessions to the nature strip of my parents' home. On top of this, the emails and text messages were extreme. They were so long, full of abuse, and a huge number each day that never ever seemed to stop. Eventually, I decided to apply for an intervention order, which was granted, but he proceeded to break the order in a number of ways. One of those was writing letters addressed to my parents, but the content was aimed at me. During this time, proceedings were started in the family court, a process that took over 5 years to be resolved, and a lot of time, money and emotional energy fighting for my children and trying to protect them from the whole situation and his behaviour. I knew my decision to leave would be hard, as I knew he would be nasty, but I never expected it to be as bad as it was. But I would do it again rather than live in an abusive environment that was so destructive for me and the girls. This journey is not over, but the worst is complete, and I am now excited about the next chapter.